Las Vegas, October 15th, 1975. Blind Pianist stood up in the middle of Elvis's concert and challenged the king of rock and roll to a musical duel. What happened next became one of the most incredible moments in music history. Before we begin this extraordinary story, know that this is just one of countless hidden moments from Elvis's life that reveal the man behind the legend. Subscribe to Elvis Presley Legacy Stories because these untold chapters of the King's journey deserve to be remembered forever. And if this story moves you, share it, because keeping Elvis's true legacy alive starts with each of us. October 15th, 1975. The Las Vegas Hilton showroom was electric with anticipation. A packed house, every seat taken, thousands of fans crammed into every available space, all waiting to witness Elvis Presley at the height of his legendary powers. The king was in his element, sweat glistening under the stage lights as he finished another explosive rendition of Hound Dog. But none of those thousands of people could have predicted. Elvis wiped his forehead with his famous silk scarf, tossing it into the crowd where dozens of hands fought to catch it. The energy was intoxicating. He grabbed his microphone, ready to transition into his next number, when suddenly a voice cut through the showroom noise like a knife through silk. Elvis Presley. The voice was so clear, so commanding, that it somehow rose above the screams of thousands of fans. Elvis stopped mid-stride, lowering his microphone as he tried to locate the source. What he saw would challenge everything he thought he knew about music. In the center section, about 20 rows back, stood a man in an immaculate white suit. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, with dark sunglasses covering his eyes and a white cane gripped firmly in his right hand. The man was clearly blind, but his posture radiated a confidence that caught Elvis completely off guard. "I am Marcus Williams," the man called out, his voice carrying with surprising clarity throughout the showroom. "And I challenge you, Elvis Presley, to show us what real music sounds like." The showroom fell into stunned silence. Nothing like this had ever happened at an Elvis concert. Security guards began moving toward Marcus, but Elvis held up his hand to stop them. "Hold on there, friend," Elvis said into his microphone, his southern charm masking his confusion. "What exactly are you saying?" Marcus Williams struck his cane against the floor with authority. "I've been playing piano for 30 years. Mr. Presley, I was born blind, but my ears work better than most people's eyes. If you're truly the king of music, prove it. Piano versus piano. May the best musician win." The crowd erupted in a mixture of gasps, boos, and nervous laughter. This was unprecedented. Elvis walked to the edge of the stage, studying this mysterious challenger. Marcus stood perfectly still, his face turned toward the stage despite his inability to see it. There was something in his bearing that commanded respect. This wasn't some drunk heckler or attention-seeking fan. This was a serious musician making a serious challenge. "You want to have a piano contest?" Elvis asked, his voice carrying both amusement and curiosity. "Right here, right now, in front of all these good people." "That's exactly what I want," Marcus replied without hesitation. "Unless, of course, you're afraid that a blind man might show you something about music you never knew." Those words hit Elvis like a lightning bolt. No one had ever questioned his musical ability so directly. Colonel Parker was frantically gesturing from the wings, clearly horrified at this unexpected deviation from the show. But Elvis had always trusted his instincts, and something about Marcus Williams intrigued him. Besides, if there was one thing Elvis Presley never backed down from, it was a musical challenge. "All right, Mr. Williams," Elvis said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You've got yourself a deal. But let's make one thing clear. This isn't going to be some kind of fight. This is going to be music, pure and simple. Can you handle that?" Marcus's stern expression softened into what might have been a smile. "That's all I ever wanted, Mr. Presley. Just music." The crowd went absolutely wild. They were about to witness something that had never happened before in rock and roll history. Security helped Marcus navigate to the stage, his white cane tapping rhythmically as he climbed the steps. Elvis personally guided him to the white grand piano that sat center stage, watching with fascination as Marcus's hands immediately found the keys. "Steinway Concert Grand, early 1970s, Marcus said softly, running his fingers along the edge. "Beautiful instrument. The acoustics in this room are perfect for it." Elvis stared in amazement. The man had identified the piano's make and approximate age just by touch. "How did you—" Elvis began, but Marcus was already settling onto the piano bench. "When you can't see, Mr. Presley, you learn to really listen. Every piano has its own voice, its own personality. This one wants to sing." The showroom had fallen into an expectant hush. Thousands of people held their breath as Elvis sat down beside Marcus. Marcus at the piano bench. What song would they choose? How would this unprecedented musical duel unfold? You pick the song, Elvis said generously. You're the challenger here. Marcus turned his face toward Elvis, listening intently to the king's voice and breathing. How about The Impossible Dream? Do you know it? Elvis felt a chill run down his spine. That song held special meaning for him. I know it, Elvis said quietly. It's about chasing something that seems out of reach. Exactly, Marcus nodded. That's been my whole life. Mr. Presley, chasing the impossible dream of being accepted as a real musician despite these. He gestured to his eyes. The vulnerability in those words touched something deep in Elvis's heart. This wasn't about competition anymore. This was about two musicians sharing their souls. Let's play it together, Elvis suggested. You take the lead, I'll follow. Marcus's hands found the keys, and what happened next was pure magic. He began playing The Impossible Dream with a skill and emotion that left Elvis speechless. The melody flowed from his fingers like water, each note perfectly placed, each phrase building on the last. But it was more than technical perfection. Marcus was pouring his entire life story into those keys. Elvis listened for a full verse before joining in, his voice carrying the lyrics while Marcus wove an intricate tapestry of sound around him. But something unexpected was happening. Elvis found himself not trying to outshine Marcus, but rather learning from him. The blind pianist's interpretation was revealing layers of the song that Elvis had never noticed before. To dream the impossible dream, Elvis sang, but his eyes never left Marcus's hands. The man was painting pictures with music, telling stories that words could never capture. Every run, every flourish, every delicate touch spoke of years of practice, of determination, of refusing to let blindness define his limitations. As the song progressed, their roles began to reverse. Marcus took over more of the melody while Elvis provided harmony and vocals. The student was becoming the teacher, and Elvis was humble enough to recognize it. The showroom was spellbound. This wasn't the high-energy rock and roll they'd come to see, but it was something far more profound. They were witnessing two masters of their craft pushing each other to new heights, creating something beautiful and spontaneous that would never be replicated. When the final notes faded away, the silence was deafening. For a long moment, neither man moved. Then Elvis began to clap, slowly at first, then with increasing enthusiasm. The crowd joined in, building to a thunderous ovation that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. But the applause wasn't for Elvis. It was for Marcus Williams. My friend, Elvis said, placing his hand on Marcus's shoulder. That was absolutely incredible. Where did you learn to play like that? Marcus's eyes glistened behind his dark glasses. The same place you learned to sing, Mr. Presley. From the heart, from necessity, from the dream that music could set me free. But Marcus wasn't finished. He had one more surprise in store. Now it's your turn to surprise me, Marcus said. Play me something from your heart. Not Elvis Presley the performer, but Elvis the man. What song means the most to you when no one else is listening? The request caught Elvis off guard. In front of 25,000 people, Marcus was asking him to be vulnerable, to strip away the persona and reveal the person underneath. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. Elvis thought for a moment, then began playing the opening chords to Love Me Tender. But this wasn't the polished version. His fans knew this was raw, simple, honest. He played it the way he might have in his childhood home in Tupelo, when music was just a way to express feelings too big for words. But the wildest surprise hadn't even happened yet. Marcus listened intently, then did something that stunned everyone. He began playing the same song, but in a completely different style. First as a jazz ballad, then as a classical piece, then as a blues number. Each interpretation revealed new dimensions of the simple melody, showing how the same song could carry completely different emotions depending on how it was approached. You see, Marcus said as he played, music isn't about showing off how many notes you can play. It's about finding the truth in each note you choose to play. Elvis stopped playing altogether, mesmerized by what he was hearing. Teach me, Elvis said suddenly, his voice barely audible over Marcus's playing. Show me how to hear music the way you do. The crowd gasped. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was asking for a music lesson in front of thousands in the showroom. Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile he'd shown all evening. Close your eyes. Mr. Presley, music isn't something you see, it's something you feel. Put your hands on the keys and tell me what this song means to you. Not what it means to your fans, not what it means to your career. What does it mean to Elvis the man? Elvis closed his eyes and began playing Love Me Tender again. But this time was different. This time he wasn't performing, he was sharing. The melody became more intimate, more personal. He was playing it like a prayer, like a confession, like a love letter to everyone who had ever mattered to him. That's it, Marcus whispered encouragingly. That's the real music. That's what your fans really come to hear. Not your voice, but your heart. When Elvis opened his eyes, they were filled with tears. Marcus, Elvis said, his voice thick with emotion, I don't know how to thank you. You've just given me the most valuable lesson of my career. Marcus reached out and found Elvis's hand. You don't need to thank me, Mr. Presley. You just need to remember this feeling. Remember that music is about connection, not competition. About lifting each other up, not tearing each other down. The crowd was on its feet, many of them crying openly. They had come to see a show and instead witnessed a transformation. Elvis stood up from the piano bench and addressed the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet Marcus Williams. He came here tonight and reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place. He's not just a pianist, he's a teacher, and I'm honored to have been his student. As Elvis spoke, something extraordinary was happening in the audience. In the third row, a young mother clutched her 7-year-old daughter, both of them crying openly. The little girl had been born with partial hearing loss, and watching Marcus perform had given her hope that her own musical dreams weren't impossible. Near the back, an elderly jazz musician who had been bitter about losing his sight in a car accident 6 months earlier felt something shift inside his chest. Maybe it wasn't over for him after all. Marcus stood as well, his cane tapping once against the stage floor, a sound that now seemed to echo with purpose rather than limitation. The other hand still rested on the piano keys, as if drawing strength from the instrument. Mr. Presley, may I tell your audience something? Of course, Elvis replied. The stage is yours. Marcus turned toward the crowd, his sightless eyes somehow seeming to see each person individually. I didn't come here tonight to embarrass Elvis Presley, Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the arena. I came here because I wanted to prove something to myself. That music has nothing to do with what you can see and everything to do with what you can feel. Elvis Presley just proved that to all of us. He paused, the silence, filled only by the soft sound of his fingers, unconsciously tracing the piano keys, each touch creating phantom melodies. But what he said next revealed the real story behind his challenge. 43 years ago, I was 5 years old when meningitis took my sight. My mother was told I'd never amount to anything, that blind children should learn practical skills, not dream about music. But my grandmother, she was different. She put my tiny hands on her old upright piano and said, Marcus, close your eyes and listen. The most beautiful music comes from places where light has never been. The showroom was so quiet you could hear people's heartbeats. Marcus's voice grew stronger. That grandmother taught me my first song, The Impossible Dream. She said if I could learn to play that song with my whole heart, I could play anything. She was right. But what she didn't tell me was that someday I'd get to play it with the king of rock and roll himself. He gestured toward Elvis, his weathered hand trembling slightly. I teach music to blind children. Every day they ask me if they'll ever be good enough to play for people who can see. Tonight, Elvis Presley answered that question by showing us all what true collaboration looks like. The emotional weight of his words settled over the arena like a blessing. Elvis wiped his eyes and smiled. Marcus, where do you teach? I'd like to help. The Nevada School for the Blind, here in Las Vegas, Marcus replied. We have 43 students, and most of them will never get the chance to play for an audience like this. Well, Elvis said, turning back to the microphone, that's about to change. Marcus, I want to make you an offer. Bring your students to my next concert, all of them, front row seats, and I want them to join me on stage for a song. The crowd erupted in applause, but Marcus held up his hand for silence. That's incredibly generous, Mr. Presley, but I have a better idea. Why don't you come to our school? Let my students teach you something about music. They may not be able to see, but they have a lot to show you. Elvis didn't hesitate. It's a deal. When can we do it? Tomorrow afternoon, if you're free. And with that simple exchange, a friendship was born that would last for the rest of Elvis's life. The concert continued for another hour, but everything had changed. Elvis performed with a new depth, a new vulnerability. He frequently looked over at Marcus, who remained on stage for the rest of the show, sometimes joining in on piano, sometimes just listening with that intense concentration that only comes from a lifetime of really hearing music. But the most magical moment came during the final song. For his closing number, Elvis chose Can't Help Falling in Love. As he began to sing, Marcus joined him on piano. But this time they weren't teacher and student or challenger and champion. They were simply two musicians sharing a moment of pure artistic truth. The crowd sang along, but quietly, reverently, as if they understood they were part of something sacred. When the last note faded away, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Elvis and Marcus embraced at the piano, two men who had started the evening as strangers and ended it as brothers in music. The standing ovation lasted for nearly 10 minutes. True to his word, Elvis visited the Nevada School for the Blind the next afternoon. What he found there changed him forever. 43 students, ranging in age from 6 to 18, all gathered around beat-up old pianos and worn instruments, making music that soared beyond anything he'd heard in the most sophisticated recording studios. The moment Elvis walked into that music room, he was hit by a wave of sensory details that would stay with him forever. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and metal strings, mixed with the faint aroma of rosin from violin bows. Every surface bore the gentle wear, marks of countless small hands finding their way by touch. Piano keys polished smooth, guitar necks darkened by fingertips, drumsticks worn to perfect grips. But it was the sound that overwhelmed him. Not just the music, but the subtle symphony of navigation, canes tapping against chair legs, fingers counting beats against thighs, the whispered encouragement between students who couldn't see each other's faces but could feel each other's presence. Marcus introduced Elvis to each student individually. There was Sarah, age 8, whose tiny fingers could find Mozart's most complex passages while her sightless eyes gazed somewhere beyond the ceiling. Tommy, 12, had written his own blues compositions about feelings he'd never seen but understood completely. Maria, 16, sang with a voice so pure it seemed to come from another world entirely. But it was what happened next that shattered Elvis's understanding of music forever. Elvis spent 3 hours with those children and later said it was the most important musical education of his life. "These kids taught me that music isn't about being perfect," Elvis told a reporter years later. "It's about being honest. They can't see the audience, so they're not performing for applause. They're performing because music is how they communicate with the world." Elvis kept his promise. At his next Las Vegas engagement, all 43 students were in the front row, and true to his word, he brought them all on stage for a rendition of He's Got the Whole World in His Hands. That brought the house down. But perhaps the most touching moment came later that evening. After the show, young Sarah approached Elvis with her guitar. "Mr. Elvis," she said in her sweet, high voice, "I wrote a song for you. Can I play it?" The song was simple but profound, about a man who had everything but found his greatest treasure when he stopped to listen to the music in other people's hearts. Elvis cried openly as she sang, recognizing himself in her lyrics. The relationship between Elvis and the Nevada School for the Blind continued for the rest of his career. He visited regularly, always unannounced, always bringing instruments and always leaving with more than he brought. Marcus Williams became one of Elvis's closest friends and musical advisors. They would spend hours together at Graceland, Marcus teaching Elvis about the theoretical aspects of music that he'd never learned, Elvis sharing the emotional techniques that had made him a star. "Marcus changed my perspective on everything," Elvis told his band members. "He taught me that limitation can become liberation, and that sometimes the most profound lessons come from the most unexpected teachers." The story of their friendship became legendary in Las Vegas. Other performers began seeking out Marcus for lessons. Word spread that the blind pianist who had challenged Elvis Presley possessed a musical wisdom that could transform anyone's understanding of their craft. Marcus never charged for his lessons. "Music is a gift," he would say. "You can't put a price on gifts." In 1977, just 2 years after their first meeting, Elvis passed away. Marcus played at his funeral, his fingers finding the keys of The Impossible Dream one last time for his friend. The same song that had brought them together now marked their goodbye. But as he played, something miraculous happened. He wasn't playing alone. 43 young voices joined him from the audience, his students singing the song they'd practiced in secret for weeks, knowing this day would come. Their voices rose together, creating a harmony that seemed to lift the very walls of the chapel. To dream the impossible dream, to fight the unbeatable foe. Each note carried the weight of every lesson Elvis had shared with them, every visit where he'd sat cross-legged on their music room floor, learning as much as he taught. "Elvis taught me that greatness isn't about being better than everyone else," Marcus said at the service, his voice breaking for the first time since anyone had known him. "It's about lifting everyone else up to be better than they thought they could be. He came to our school school expecting to give us a gift, but he left with something far more precious. He learned how to hear music the way we do, with his whole heart. After the service, Marcus made a pilgrimage to Graceland, carrying with him something special. In his weathered hands was a cassette tape, a recording of Elvis's last visit to the school, where he'd sat at their old piano and played Love Me, tender with a simplicity and honesty that had made every student weep. They had secretly recorded it as a surprise for his birthday, but now it would serve as his memorial. Marcus placed the tape on Elvis's grave along with a single white cane, not his own, but one that had belonged to Sarah, the 8-year-old who had written the song for Elvis. She had painted it white and gold, Elvis's colors, and insisted it be buried with him, so he can find his way to us when he wants to play music in heaven, she had whispered. Today, more than 45 years later, the Marcus Williams Music Foundation continues to provide instruments and education to blind children across the country. The foundation's motto, taken from something Elvis said during one of his visits to the school, reads, "Music doesn't care if you can see, it only cares if you can feel." Every year on October 15th, the anniversary of that legendary concert, students at the Nevada School for the Blind gather to perform the impossible, Dream. They play it for Marcus, they play it for Elvis, and they play it for everyone who has ever been told their dreams are impossible. But the most touching tradition happens at exactly 9:47 p.m. The exact moment when Elvis first asked Marcus to teach him. The lights in the music room are turned completely off, plunging everyone into the same darkness that Marcus lived in his entire life. In that darkness, they play Love Me Tender, the way Elvis learned it that night, not as a performance but as a prayer, a conversation between souls who understand that the most beautiful music happens when you stop trying to see and start learning to feel. The piano from that 1975 concert is now housed in the school's music room. Its bench bears the gentle indentations where both Elvis and Marcus sat that night, their weight permanently impressed into the leather. The keys themselves tell the story, middle C slightly more worn than the others, because that's where Marcus always began his lessons, teaching students to find their center before they could find their song. A small plaque on the bench reads, "In memory of the night two musicians became friends, and the world learned that the greatest performances come not from competition, but from collaboration. Music doesn't care about what you can see. It only cares about what you're willing to feel." Elvis Presley, October 16th, 1975. Those words, Elvis's own quote, were discovered years later in Marcus's personal diary, written the morning after their first meeting. The diary entry, now framed and hanging above the piano, reveals Elvis's private thoughts. "Last night, a blind man taught me to see music in a completely new way. I thought I knew everything about performing, but Marcus showed me the difference between playing notes and speaking truth. I will never be the same, and I'm grateful for that." Marcus Williams passed away in 2003, but his legacy lives on in every student who learns that blindness is not a barrier to beauty, that limitation can become liberation, and that sometimes the most profound lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. The lesson Elvis learned that night in Las Vegas echoed through the rest of his career and continues to inspire musicians today. Real music isn't about technical perfection or showmanship. It's about vulnerability, honesty, and the courage to connect with others through the universal language of melody and rhythm. Elvis Presley was already the king of rock and roll when he met Marcus Williams, but that night he became something even more important. He became a student again, humble enough to learn from a blind pianist who reminded him that music, at its core, is about seeing with your heart. And perhaps that's the most beautiful, impossible dream of all, that music can help us see things we never knew were there. That night, Elvis reminded the world that sometimes the greatest performances happen when we stop competing and start collaborating. That true artistry comes not from showing off, but from showing up for each other, for the music, and for the moments that matter most. If this story touched you, imagine how many more moments like this are hidden in Elvis's legacy. Subscribe to Elvis Presley Legacy Stories so you don't miss the next untold chapter of the King's life. And if you believe these stories deserve to live forever, share this video, because keeping the legacy alive starts with us.